Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Michael O'Brien. I'm the Public Affairs Manager for AEM here in D.C., and I'm glad everybody could join us today for this quick webinar on the State of the Union address this week. We're going to go through a few things today, which I'll outline, but I wanted to thank everybody for their time and run a little bit through what we're going to talk about today. So what I'll do is I'll start with a little bit of quick context for the State of the Union, some of the polling numbers and some of the political considerations heading into Tuesday's speech, and recap some of the points that the President made and some of the points Republicans have made in response, and try and offer a little bit of an interpretation in terms of what that meant. And then what we'll do is we'll pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about what this means for policies important to the equipment manufacturing industry. Some of those that you can expect to hear me touch upon are the Highway Trust Fund, the Export-Import Bank, tax reform, and a few other policies that we'll talk about throughout the presentation. I'm happy to field some questions toward the end of the presentation, and I would ask that you submit them through the question and answer box here in the WebEx presentation. I'll be able to see them and respond to them, and I'll read them off when the time comes for us to do the Q&A. So, starting a little bit with the political context for the State of the Union. As you know, we have a resurgent Republican Congress. For the first time since 2007, Republicans have control of the House and Senate. The Republicans picked up 13 seats in the House in the midterm elections and 9 seats in the Senate. What that amounts to is a historic Republican majority in Congress, and we've seen in recent days that this is a more diverse Congress in some ways that consists of a core number of conservatives, but also a number of lawmakers who come from swing and moderate districts who have considerations heading into their general elections in 2016. Of course, Democrats still have a good foothold on their own seats, especially in the Senate. Because Republicans only have 54 seats in the Senate, that means on procedural votes to overcome a filibuster, Republicans need an additional 6 Democratic votes. So that's some of the context in terms of the raw numbers for the makeup of the House and Senate. Heading into Tuesday's night, though, we have a few things going on. This Republican Congress has been very interested in being assertive with their new majority, passing legislation in the House related to the Keystone Pipeline that's currently before the Senate right now and is headed to the President's desk where it faces a veto threat. Republicans are also trying to curtail some of the President's regulations as it relates to immigration by only funding the Department of Homeland Security for a series of months. They have also taken aim at some elements of the financial reform legislation in their earliest few weeks here of Congress. What's been one of the more fascinating dynamics, though, is while Republicans have, been resurgent since the November elections, President Obama has also seen a partial recovery in his approval ratings. This seems to have been driven in part by some of the positive economic numbers we've seen recently, and the President has pressed his advantage. But as you can see with the numbers here, for the first time since, a few years ago, really, frankly, after the President's reelection, he now has 50% approval ratings, and that's a significant turnaround, up 9 points from just a month ago. So the combination of good economic numbers and low gas prices, combined with the lack of news, for instance, about foreign policy challenges related to Russia or ISIS, have put the President in a good position. At the same time, Congress, despite this change in power, doesn't remain overwhelmingly popular. On Tuesday, an NBC Wall Street Journal poll came out pegging Congress's approval rating at only 16% among all Americans. Frankly, among Republicans, self-identified Republicans in that poll, the GOP Congress didn't do much better. So there's still a sour attitude, not just toward Congress, but I think all of Washington. This dynamic, though, underscores the extent to which last fall's election was about almost providing a little bit of a rebuke to the president more than an endorsement of the GOP. And all these dynamics are important because they set the underlying stage for Tuesday's State of the Union address and, of course, the policy agenda going forward. As you can see here, a Pew Research Center poll came out on Tuesday sort of underscoring some of those top priorities. The economy and jobs remain among the top issues, of course, with recent news about ISIS and the recent terrorist attack in France. Terrorism remains a top priority, and you can run down the list there, seeing that there are a number of issues that enjoy broad public support for Congress to tackle. And, of course, you can't ignore the fact that we have a looming presidential election. As you've seen in the news recently, several candidates have already announced their intention to either explore or actually run for the presidency, and 3 of those actors remain in Congress right now. Rand Paul, the senator from Kentucky, Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas, and Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida, all of whom could be potential Republican candidates for the presidency within just a few months. So those people in the Senate are as much considering the legislative agenda as the presidential election that's coming up here. So we'll move here into a quick recap about the State of the Union itself, and as a polite reminder, any questions and answers you have while we go along, please enter them into the WebEx display. So, President Obama, what this speech was about for him was trying to play offense. You know, he's seeing, and his team is seeing, those recent poll numbers and this kind of series of positive economic numbers that have, you know, kind of put a little bit of wind in his sails, if you want to use that statement. And he was trying to sort of play offense for the first time in really a year. And you could see that in his confidence, which frankly bordered on cockiness. You know, he had his line where he said he had won his last election and Republicans applauded, and he snapped back, "I know because I've won both of them." And that sort of set the atmosphere for what you saw on Tuesday. I think at the same time, though, the president understood that a number of the policies that he proposed would never become law with this Congress being composed of Republicans the way that it is. The tax proposals he's laid out in recent weeks, which would modify some of the estate and capital gains taxes to pay down expansions of earned income tax credits and other middle-class tax provisions, it's practically dead on arrival. Other priorities that he touched upon, such as expanding paid sick leave, free community college for 2 years, raising the minimum wage, and ending the United States embargo with Cuba, those are also unlikely to go anywhere this year. And I think the best way to view it then is this speech was about kind of defining the contours of the 2016 election, both the presidential and the congressional races, which, you know, frankly is the first kind of marker in terms of President Obama's legacy. You know, you can see here at the bottom that Republicans didn't exactly respond favorably. John Boehner called them fantasy land proposals, and that says all you really need to know about that. Moving forward here, there are reasons still to be optimistic, though. It's not all doom and gloom. And 2 of the issues that are important for AEM members and some of our broader industry issues are trade and infrastructure. You know, for John Boehner going as far as to label some of the things Fantasyland proposals, one thing that actually won a lot of Republican applause was Trade Promotion Authority. So for those of you who are looking toward the president president to perhaps negotiate trade deals, TTIP and TPP, both European and Pacific, encompassing trade agreements. Trade Promotion Authority would essentially provide an opportunity for the president to negotiate and fast-track those agreements through Congress. This is something that could actually be attainable this year. And as it relates to infrastructure spending, President Obama once again called for using repatriated corporate profits to fund infrastructure. And at risk of using too much Washington jargon, what that means is corporations who have profits overseas, but they haven't been taxed within the U.S. Realm would be able to bring those back at a lower than normal rate, and the government would get some of that tax revenue while also providing an infusion of infrastructure spending. As you can see, Paul Ryan, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, the top tax writing committee, said, we want to get a transportation bill done. And of course, the Highway Trust Fund, which we'll talk about a little bit down the line here, is a major priority for AEM members. Another wild card remains tax reform. Both the president and Republican leaders have talked a lot about this as a potential area of compromise. However, as you can see with the policy that the president laid out earlier this week and some of the directions that Republicans are talking about, there's still a lot of separation between the two of them. For instance, on the question of even whether this should be a revenue positive or revenue neutral tax reform. Some other tangential issues to this presentation where you might see some areas of agreement is an authorization of military force for the president to prosecute military campaigns against ISIS, criminal justice reform, and some cybersecurity protections that would be in response, for instance, to the hacking attack most recently against Sony. Moving on to the Republican response, I included a couple of pictures here that sort of underscore the dynamic. That is a lot of applauding Democrats and a lot of Republicans sitting on their hands. And put simply, the president kind of delivered his speech in part to make that dynamic apparent. And this matters because Republicans control Congress. So maybe your best technique isn't to go right out and try and, offend as many Republicans as you can, but that is one of the dynamics we saw on Tuesday night. As for Republicans, it was Joni Ernst, the freshman senator from Iowa, kind of considered a rising star within the GOP, the first woman ever elected to Congress from the state of Iowa. And she delivered the official Republican response after only a few weeks on the job. And you could see some of those areas of agreement, but also some of the slight differences between the president and Republicans on some of these key issues. So we saw Joni Ernst talk about breaking down trade barriers. Again, trade being a potential area for agreement and a very productive element of this upcoming Congress. That was very encouraging. As you can see there, she spoke specifically about boosting manufacturing wages and jobs right here at home. And some of these trade agreements have the possibility of opening up markets abroad for some of AEM's member companies to sell their products abroad more easily. On Keystone, Republicans have obviously made this a major issue. And it was something that featured prominently into Mrs. Ernst's response. One thing I would say, though, is that while Senator Ernst described Keystone in the context of infrastructure, this was her only mention of infrastructure. And Republicans have sort of been bedeviled by the question in recent years as to how you finance and pay for expansions in infrastructure spending. And so I think they tried to sidestep that question with the official response here and focus on one area where they can agree, which is Keystone. And again, on taxes, we see some powerful language here about updating an outdated tax code and ironing out loopholes. But again, where that comes down to in terms of negotiations between a Republican Congress and the president is some of those finer details. So moving toward some analysis here, recapping some of those elements and what it means for AEM members. So as we've talked about, both the President and Republicans have talked quite a bit about their hope for infrastructure investment and trade agreements. And that's a significant thing because the Highway Trust Fund reauthorization is coming up at the end of May, and the Export-Import Bank's reauthorization is coming up at the end of June, and I'll talk a little bit about both of those in a bit here. Obviously, though, this is meant to underscore the fact that as an industry, we have a lot at play before this Congress and a lot of deadlines here. And it should be encouraging that both the President and Republicans are professing, for instance, their interest in a long-term highway trust fund bill or, overall investment in infrastructure. That's a positive thing, but at the same time, there are a number of differences and a number of different options before Congress in terms of how to pay for some of those things, especially as it relates to the Highway Trust Fund, be it repatriation, raising the gas tax, or looking at other revenue-raising streams to make up an estimated $100 billion gap in the next decade over the Highway Trust Fund. Congress and the administration also remained frankly, very far apart on issues like taxes, government spending, and health care. With, some of those issues, specifically, budget agreements and a potential congressional revisiting of the Affordable Care Act, if the Supreme Court were to act in a substantial way on that, those could be significant things. Republicans are also eager to roll back some of the Obama administration's regulations regarding immigration and the environment. Last year, the Environmental Protection Agency took steps to kind of unilaterally assert some controls over carbon emissions and environmental substances, and Republicans have made it a core element of their plan to sort of use their authority to roll those back as best as they can. And the wild card, of course, is the debt ceiling. The deadline for this is a little uncertain, frankly. It depends on how the government can massage some of its finances. But at some point, likely this spring, perhaps in May, Congress is going to have to vote to raise the debt ceiling. And as we've seen in past instances, this can be a bit beguiling for Congress. But the one thing I would say is it could provide a springboard at which, you could accelerate, for instance, some of the proposals regarding infrastructure investment and repatriation or tax reform, be it corporate or individual. And moving forward then, there are some major deadlines to keep in mind. At the end of May, the Highway Trust Fund runs out of both funding and spending authority. So what Congress has to do is both reauthorize the existence of the Highway Trust Fund, in essence, and the policy governing that, in addition to finding the revenue to ensure that the Highway Trust Fund can actually meet those obligations that they then approve. At the end of June, the Export-Import Bank's reauthorization is set to expire. And one of the important things to keep in mind there is that it's kind of a different dynamic where you have a powerful chairman, Jeb Hensarling of the House Financial Services Committee, who is a conservative critic of the bank, who is essentially in a position where he doesn't have to do anything in order to kill off the bank. So there's been quite a bit of effort here to try and preserve the bank's function. Over the course of the next couple of months, one of the things to keep an eye out for is the differing budget proposals from both the administration and the Republican Congress. These are non-binding proposals, and they're resolutions that either pass or don't pass Congress, but what they are is essentially a menu of each party's priorities over the next year. The Keystone Pipeline is obviously something to keep an eye on as well. We expect that the Senate will advance some sort of legislation to the President's desk in coming weeks. The President has said he will veto that, preferring to let the State Department's own review process play out. That's likely a stall tactic by the administration, but the good news is, that could mean that the administration is preserving that as a bargaining chip in some of these fights down the road. As mentioned before, Trade Promotion Authority and TPP and TTIP, these are, again, Pacific and European trade agreements that would open up trade and expansion. I think that these are probably the best areas for potential agreement in terms of the coming Congress. Again, tax reform, the debt ceiling, view these as sort of interrelated priorities, things that could serve as catalysts for each other, and they're important to watch. And of course, as I mentioned here, the Supreme Court in King versus Burwell has an important decision that would essentially had the potential of eliminating some of the state subsidies for healthcare exchanges under the Affordable Care Act. That would have the effect of undermining a substantial portion of Obamacare. If the Supreme Court were to go down that road and roll back these subsidies, I would expect it to trigger a fairly massive political fight in Congress that could consume, frankly, the rest of this year. And, looking forward here, one of the nice things that we can plug here is what AEM is doing about it. And one of the things that we have through our I Make America program is presenting opportunities for AEM member companies to come to Washington, D.C. and, convey your industry's views on important issues to lawmakers themselves. You're the best possible advocates for our industry, and we really count on you to make that case for lawmakers. And as you can see here, there are a couple of dates to keep in mind. An Export-Import Bank fly-in on February 24th and 25th, and our Transportation and Construction Coalition fly-in on April 14th and 15th. It's important to recognize that these aren't our only opportunities, and, in terms of how we can help facilitate some of these visits, please don't hesitate to get in touch with our DC team. There are any number of ways that you can sort of influence the process, which we'll get to here in a second. Of course, obviously, after the success of the Harley Tour last year, we're going to continue to stay on the road, visiting member companies and hosting events to convey the importance of manufacturing and our issues, especially to members of Congress and elected leaders when we can get there. And just moving to our final slide, I'd like to thank you for your time and submit any questions that you have. I do see one here while we wait for others to come in. And the first question is, what are some of the most important things AEM members can do to help make things happen on our important issues? And in addition to some of the I Make America elements that we described just a moment ago, one of the best ways you can do this, for instance, is hosting a member of Congress at your facility, or working with us to craft a letter to the editor or op-ed to your local newspaper on a specific issue. We have a tremendous toolkit at imakeamerica.com sort of outlining and facilitating a number of those different things. We have a vast amount of research that you can use or we can help you use to either, write those letters, host officials, or arrange any number of other ways you can do to impact your member of Congress and try and communicate with them. I think we're still waiting for some other questions to come in queue. If you have any, please submit them now. So our second question here is what happens if Congress, for instance, fails to reauthorize the Highway Trust Fund at the end of May? And there are a couple of answers to that question. One would be that they would take another short-term approach to this legislation like they did last July. And our industry's view has been that, this is a poor solution because it provides very little certainty to the industry and state departments over the long term to make long-term decisions and planning decisions about procurement, the types of projects they'll pursue, the type of spending they want to make. And so a short-term solution, I would call it a very real option if Congress fails to reach an agreement. And the alternative, of course, would be some sort of default. And you know, what the implications for that would be is each state Department of Transportation would face a significant cutback in the federal block grants that they receive out of the Highway Trust Fund. Again, of course, that's funded by gas taxes. And they would be forced to make some tough decisions in a couple of different ways. They would be forced to maybe cancel projects in out years or dial back on some of the hours they have people working on current projects. And, you know, you've also seen in a number of circumstances, states, for instance, revisit their own gas tax rates as a way for making up for that federal deficit. You know, we've seen it in Virginia in recent years. The state of Michigan just pursued that. South Dakota's governor, a Republican, just proposed a incremental gas tax of 2 cents per year and then linking their state gas tax to inflation. And South Carolina's governor, Nikki Haley, just today called for raising their state gas tax by 10 cents, offset by a commensurate cut in the state income tax level. So long story short, you know, it's a very difficult situation. And our next question is, you know, how much time is there for Congress to realistically reach agreement on issues like the gas tax before the politics of the presidential campaign comes into play? And the answer is not a whole lot of time. You have that deadline by the end of May, but even if you were to get a short-term extension, truth be told, the presidential campaign is already well underway, and it's really going to begin hitting its stride in August and throughout the fall, leading up to the Iowa caucuses. And, you know, what that means is, again, going back to our previous slide on I Make America and AEM member involvement, it's that much more important to get everybody engaged in this fight and making sure we convey as an industry to Congress the importance of getting this done now and not kicking the can down the road. There's another question here about whether or not the Republican gains in Congress will carry over to that presidential election in 2016, and what would some of the implications be for AEM members about whether a Democrat or Republican is elected. And to make a long story short, I wouldn't read too much into the 2016 elections based on the 2014 elections. And the big reason for that is because the turnout in midterm elections, and the two most recent midterm elections, differs substantially from presidential elections. Presidential elections feature a number of more young voters, more immigrant communities, and a number of communities and engaged participants who tend to be more democratic, especially in swing states. So I would not, based on the 2014 returns, predict that a Republican victory in 2016 is likely. It might happen, it might not happen. I'm not going to put odds on it, but I wouldn't premise that prediction on that. As to whether a Republican president or a Democratic president would be better, you know, I'm going to sidestep that question slightly by saying, you know, each party would bring a different issue portfolio to the table. You know, you kind of have to take their platforms as a whole. And, you know, frankly, at this stage, it's a little early to predict, you know, the implications of President Jeb Bush versus President Ted Cruz versus President Hillary Clinton versus President, for instance, Elizabeth Warren. Those are all very different things, and even within each party, there's a substantial difference in terms of what those things would mean. And I think we have time for one last question about the 2016 elections, which is, given what we said previously, does that mean Democrats would gain back seats in the 2016 midterms? And my thought would be to bet on it, frankly. Republicans, again, have their highest majority, their biggest majority since post-World War II. Just as a matter of kind of reversion to the mean, don't expect that to last forever. There are a number of Republicans, for instance, who are elected in some of these marginal districts where Democrats are going to turn out in more force in the 2016 elections, where, you could expect them to hand back some of those seats. Short of a wave election, I don't expect Democrats to take back the House, but in the Senate, for instance, where Republicans have a 4-vote majority, they're going to be defending a lot of seats in 2016 that feature Republican senators in very swing or vulnerable states. So again, just one of the many dynamics to keep an eye on. I do appreciate all the questions. I won't take up more of your time, but I wanted to thank everybody for their participation today. Hopefully you found this helpful. And again, as you can see on this final slide here, if you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to field them. That's what I'm here for, along with the rest of the DC team. And you can email me at mobrien@aem.org. So thanks everybody so much, and I look forward to visiting with everybody very soon. Thanks.